Hello, good evening, and welcome. I'm Simon Bestwick.
And I'm Gemma Files, and this, of course, is No Darkness But Ours.
And we have another special guest on the podcast today, the one and only extraordinary screenwriter and short story writer and novella writer and novelist, Stephen Volk. Woo!
Hello.
Hi, Stephen.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
Thanks very much for coming on the show. It's great to have you.
That's all right. My pleasure. It'd be good to have a chat.
Yes.
Now, I was realizing today that, and I think I actually tweeted about it, or exceeded about it, or whatever the hell they call it these days, that I have been a huge fan of yours for literally 30 years.
Oh, wow. That's a bit overwhelming, but thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yeah. Makes me feel old, but then most things do. Most things do.
Me too.
Now, we know for contractual reasons we can't really talk about Ghostwatch in today's blog. So I was going to mention it up front now, because obviously this is one of the things that this is probably the thing that people think about first when they hear your name, and yes, it is brilliant. All I can say is I suppose it must be kind of a bit of a strange double-edged thing, because on the one hand you've written something that 32 years later people are still talking about, are still scared by, are still influenced by, and on the other hand you must be thinking, you must sometimes feel I have been writing for 32 years since then.
Absolutely. It's actually quite. I was feeling quite like in the mode that I wanted to announce with great proclamation that I was no longer going to talk about Ghostwatch ever again. And then I thought that's like, it's a bit of a Brer Rabbit kind of statement, of kind of attracting unwanted attention. So I thought, no, I just don't want to. It's become a little. I'm very, very grateful. I'm very proud of it. I'm very, very chuffed by the attention that it's got. Especially, I mean, the thought that it's remembered 30 years later is fantastic. But and what people say about it is really wonderful and humbling at times. But I do feel at this point I've kind of had my fill of interviews about it, that I've answered all the possible questions about it, and mostly what I can do is just repeat the answers that I've been saying for at least 10 or 15 years, and there are other things I'd rather be talking about, really, and as you implied, I have been doing some other stuff, unless someone came up with super interesting new observations about Ghostwatch, which is not impossible, well, he says grandly, but I'd kind of like to draw a kind of at least dotted line under it and say, look, there it all is. It's all the links are on my website. Just don't ask me those things again, because it's kind of all out there, So let's open the floodgates to discussing every other sort of horror that we can think of.
All right. Something that occurred to me, aside from the fact that looking down your Wikipedia page, I kept going, oh, I've seen that and that and that. He did that. What? Is the wonderful, I started out reading short stories more than anything else in horror. And it was a bit of a build for me to get into horror proper. But even from the very beginning, I often found that I was as likely to respond to much older stories as I was to respond to ones that were, obviously from the same world that I was inhabiting. And we're talking about like the 1980s here.
Yeah.
And what I love about all of your stuff, which kind of falls into two different categories as goes with this. I'm sorry, I can hear my son singing a weird song. Anyway, which kind of falls into two different categories as regards to this, is the respect that you have for older horror and the influence that this older type of horror seems to apply to your own work. So the two categories are obviously categories of historical horror, where you're taking people who existed in the real world and were real people doing actual horrific things sometimes, and also sometimes creating horror at the same time. And then you play with the details of those people's lives, find like a lacuna where you can insert something where the horror that they are part of kind of comes into their own life, their own world. Most obviously, the first thing that I saw you do that with was Gothic. By the way, I really, really like the most recent cut of Gothic, which I finally got to see on Tubi. But I was also really impressed with it when you did it with Whitstable, which, God, I love that novella so much. Everything in that collection is amazing, but Whitstable is just like, I mean, I'm a huge Peter Cushing fan. He means a lot to me as a person and as an actor. And the way that you were able to really acquaint people with what a wonderful, lovely man he was, and the depth of his grief after the death of his wife. But then also to find this amazing real life horror as well there. Nothing necessarily supernatural going on unless you believe there's a certain vampirism inherent in some really bad actions.
Well, I think for me, it's I suppose there's a deep theme in a lot of what I do, which is about being interested in kind of where we come from as a genre. And I don't really see, first of all, I don't see the point of being kind of ashamed of it, or let's kind of own the stuff that we grew up with and the stuff that we we are drawn to, and it's kind of part of our sensibility, which is why it kind of we cling to it. But to just I've done this also, but to just kind of copy it, or to just to reference it, or to parody it, isn't kind of enough on its own for me. I think at least it's not enough. I don't mind when other people do it; it's quite entertaining. But for me, I've kind of got to delve in a bit. I've got to get my hands dirty into it and think what's kind of going on here. And that's why I like kind of, I don't think I've often used the writer as a main character the way that Stephen King does very often, which is a surrogate self kind of thing, very obviously, and I'm sure he wouldn't deny it. But I found a kind of skew-with version of that for me is to actually choose a real writer or a real creator that's related to horror. Because I found by doing that them kind of once you take a real person, then for a start, they're multi-dimensional. They're not as simple as they're not kind of coded in a simplistic way. So you've already got inbuilt contradictions there straight off the bat, that you have to deal with, and that becomes a kind of conundrum to unravel even before you start accommodating the fiction that you want to play around with or tell. And you really have to get buried in there to get to grips with it,
That's an interesting take, because I mean, one of the things that occurred to me was how much of your work is rooted in what a form of biography is, and that is of taking real life not just real life events, but very much real life people as your starting point in Gothic, in the Dark Masters books, and of course, you've recently completed a novel which I have been privileged to be to read, and without giving anything away, this is again based on
a real thing, a real person.
Yeah. And again, a lot of some writers, I kind of thinking, some writers would find that kind of limiting, kind of constricting, because you've got to follow a certain path. You've got to you kind of know where it's all going. You can't innovate to a great extent in terms of in terms of the key events. But if anything, for you, that's actually it's not a limitation.
I think I can work the other way around for me sometimes. I mean, I don't, not everything I do is what we're talking about at the moment, but sure. Sometimes if you've got a schematic, say, story that's going on in your mind and you think, oh yeah, I've got my main protagonist here. Who are they? Who is she, him? And it's such a kind of blank canvas. It can be immensely intimidating to kind of invent this thing from nothing. I mean, sometimes albeit in an anonymous kind of way, I have to have a start point somewhere. Sometimes it's people I know. Sometimes it's a kind of, I don't mean specific people, but maybe it's an amalgamation of certain people I know, just because you want to get somewhere near that kind of authenticity in a character to make the story believable. Because let's face it, for me, that's part of the game, if you like. Not that I think it's trivial in any sense, but part of the game for me is, let's play with something that's either highly unlikely or downright impossible. But for the space of 90 minutes watching a film, or the space of 20 pages of a story, you absolutely believe what's going on, or I can convince you for that amount of time that there's some semblance of reality about it. It interests me less to tell a realistic tale in a realistic way, or let's say a naturalistic tale in a naturalistic way. What's the accomplishment? It's kind of like journalism, So, but to get away with something that's absolutely outrageous and hopefully maybe even transgressively off-putting, but you do something else with it, in terms of that kind of conviction, that becomes if you can pull that off, it's kind of a magic trick, really, in a way. It's very satisfying, anyway.
Absolutely.
Think of Cushing again, actually, because we rewatched Tales from the Crypt recently, and all the other segments are very, they're fun, they're entertaining, they're very, and in the manner of the Tales of the Crypt stories, they're quite little simple moral fables on so many levels. And then you get to Peter Cushing's segment, and even though the form of it is pretty much the same as the others, there is the conviction that he brings to his performance as this sweet, gentle, kind old man who's recently suffered this terrible loss, and who's basically having everything he loves and cares that he loves and cares about just cruelly taken away from him, and it's absolutely heartrending to watch.
Well, it's because that side of the emotional side of the story is not comic book, is it? It's because we can all identify with that, I think, on a human level, and I think that's why it stands out, really, and that's why he's a beloved actor, because he even in I know everyone says this, it's a bit of a cliche, but even in his worst films, he gives it his all in terms of seriousness, and I think that's kind of my approach. I mean, I'm not saying that some things haven't turned out badly or haven't turned out comedic, even when you don't intend them to, because that's just the way one's career goes sometimes. Yes, I always meant it to be a comedy, actually. No, maybe I didn't, but you know what I mean? There's many a rocky road to things being realized very often, but the idea for me of taking it seriously is part of the misdirection that you need for the trick, really, because I know a lot of people love parody and they love the mix of comedy and horror. I mean, I do at times. I like You know, I like that. What's that film, Brain Dead? Or you know, the most outrageous kind of Pete Jackson kind of blood fest. You know, I can enjoy those. But I wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't make it or write it. You know, but you know, because it's just not the way my mind works, really.
I've always thought that the main problem of writing horror is that you're trying to convince people that something that everyone quote knows, received wisdom, but you know, we're pretty sure does not happen, can happen, particularly in terms of supernatural horror. So so when you're working with the physical detail and just the life detail of an actual real person. And
I can give you, if I may interject, I can give you an interesting illustration of that. Actually, when I was I adapted a book called Midwinter of the Spirit, which was a book by Phil Rickman. And when I went up for the job, you know, one does a audition, so to speak, for it, and I was sure I wouldn't get it really. But one of the questions that the exec producer asked me was, well, how would you do the supernatural scenes? That seemed a very weird question to me. How would you do the supernatural scenes? And I said I didn't really understand the question, because it presupposed that the supernatural scenes was somehow different from all the other scenes in the thing. And I said, they're not different from the rest of the story. They are actually part of the story.
Yes.
And I couldn't really answer how they would be different. I said, nearest I could come was I said I would do the supernatural scenes like I did the supernatural scenes in Afterlife, for instance, which were always based on the subjectivity of the character. So they were an extension of the psychology of the scene. They weren't inserted like set pieces. They came from the internal life of the character. Because for me, we get big subject, but to me, ghosts are always projections. They're always the projection of the flaw in the character, or some kind of relation to the amplified psychology of the dilemma. And this I thought was blindingly obvious, but it clearly wasn't to people that didn't think. I think about the supernatural in that way. I just think about it being like an amplified version of human dilemmas.
Absolutely.
That's how I treat it, really.
And particularly in terms of Marilee, because she's already coming from a place of being a priest. She's coming from a place of, and so she's involved in the supernatural every day.
Yeah.
So, but
doesn't really help her much. I came to it with a bit of trepidation, because I thought, can I really write a vicar character? Because I'm not sure I can. I'm not sure it's my idea of a dynamic plot to actually have someone that believes tackling something that is about the belief system. But when I read the character, I thought more and more that she's someone that kind of doubts her belief, or she's thrown into the lion's den, so to speak. Good analogy. In terms of testing that belief. And once I got that handle on it, I could write her really almost like a skeptical character, rather than a capital C Christian character, which I thought would be difficult for me to difficult for that to work in the plot, as far as I was concerned.
I mean, it's very much, she has this job of being the person standing between the idea of God and people who want to reach that idea.
Absolutely. And I always think that the crucial kind of engine, I think, of supernatural story for me is doubt. Because doubt is what makes it authentically human. That's, I believe, how most humans would react to that kind of thing in real life. I don't think most of us would accept a supernatural occurrence if it occurred to now in the corner of the room or behind you in the office. I don't think we'd naturally say, "Oh, thanks very much, you're a ghost, I understand it." We wouldn't accept it. We would doubt it. And we would be, so I think doubt is there's classics like Night of the Demon, It's all about the character that doesn't want to believe it. And funnily enough, when I wrote The Awakening, just to jump about all the Rebecca Hall character, on the day that I visited the set, I met her very, very briefly, and she said she started to read the script and she saw that it was a skeptical character, and she what she said to me was, and then I thought, oh yeah, this is the journey we're going to go on. And she said it as if it was kind of a mistake. And I realized I was thinking about it on the way home, and I thought she thinks that was a mistake, telegraphing that. But actually, it's not. It's a promise. It's a kind of, okay, this is the journey you're on. But how are we going to get there? Yeah. And, it's not kind of, it wasn't done accidentally, like it should have been done, ideally some other way. It was kind of like that was the pattern that it had to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also about PTSD, and it's also about trauma and the echoing of trauma and the things that you erase from your own brain if they occur to you when you're young enough. There's so much. I
got fascinated by the idea that at the time, actually, it was written over many years, different drafts with different directors and all the rest of it. But at one stage, I was very interested in, false memory, false confession, and how people can even confess to things that it's later proven that they didn't do. And they've actually written a scenario in their mind about things that never actually happened. That's one of the most in a way under-acknowledged kind of bizarre things that happened in the 90s that I don't think people have got their head around how that can be really possible,
Well, it's happening all over America right now. It's happening all over the world. People just convincing themselves that it's perfectly fine to say, oh yeah, Jewish space lasers can control the weather.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that.
There's something today about they've accused Biden of controlling the hurricane or something, haven't they?
Yeah. That's exactly it. And it's like, okay.
I think he's taken out Mar-a-Lago and Trump Tower by now if he could do that.
that's what people have been saying. But yeah, I mean, just the way that this whole concept of fake news has given everyone free reign to just make
alternative facts, didn't they say that?
The people who shouted about fake news the loudest have often been the people who are actually once promoting it, one about every.
Oh, that was the one that literally days ago, where wasn't it J.D. Vance that said to an interviewer, "Oh, you said you weren't going to fact check."
Yes, and sometimes you have to make up a story to get people to go to the truth that you want to show them.
I think that's what they call a cell phone in modern parlance.
or just the idea of you have to make up a story to it's like that line from Mountains of the Moon. I always lie my way to the truth eventually, except it's not truth.
Oh, do you remember Roger Moore used to say in interviews, "Oh yes, I do all my own stunts and tell all my own lies."
Very nice.
We're all trying to make sense of the world around us, and so we're all constructing narratives that enable us to do that. It's one of the reasons I think why Trump and Brexit succeeded in that 2016. You could fact check them all you wanted, but you were just clipping off these little bits of a story. They were telling the people behind Brexit, the people behind Trump, were telling people a story that enabled them to make sense of their own misfortunes, and their opponents weren't doing that. They were just basically saying, no, everything's the status quo is basically fine. And for a lot of
the thing that I don't understand is, I mean, I like King Kong, but I wouldn't vote for him.
I mean, could he do a worse job? I ask myself than Trump. No, I mean, absolutely. And there's a very, very screwed up metric of. I mean, we could get all into the politics of it, but I can't help noticing that when you have like a mild-mannered allotment owner and jam maker in the UK who basically says, let's plant more trees and, spend money on public services and not have homelessness, and everyone starts screaming he's this crazed anti-Semite and wouldn't want to be dictator. Whereas people like someone like Nigel Farage, who's basically everything stepping out. He's, this is like a, so you've got like, it's very interesting where the acceptable range of opinion is, and ultimately, if you won't let any potential solutions come from one side, if you keep cutting them off and shooting them down and stamping on them, then when things aren't good, it's the people from the other end of the spectrum who are going to be offering the answers and the solutions, and there will be final solutions. We've seen this because we've seen it before. Yeah,
that's absolutely true. To return to Gothic just for a second, what's interesting with that particular story is that you begin with a reality that is so unbelievable that really anything else can come out of it. It's like, okay, so Mary Shelley.
Well, that was the thing. You see, I read
exists.
Yeah.
Because William Godwin and Mary Wollstonecraft got together, and then she sort of becomes her father's creature, and he's trying to prove that a woman can be just as well educated as a man, and just as, but he doesn't really, he still has this thing at the back of his head where he's like, but she's still a woman. So, so he doesn't do various things that maybe he should do in terms of warning her about various things. She gets involved with Percy Shelley. They run off to Europe with her cousin. Her cousin gets involved with Lord Byron. They all end up getting together
in the same place.
On a holiday and making up stories which later give rise to Dracula and Frankenstein.
That's it. Yeah, that's it. And that's what I read in David Perry's wonderful book, The Heritage of Horror.
Yes.
And that's really the first couple of chapters in which he have been written about in more detail since by the likes of Christopher Frayling, in his wonderful book, I think called Frankenstein, The First 200 Years, which goes into all the diaries and everything. I mean, Frayling is fantastic on all that stuff. But I read these couple of chapters that David, and he and I have subsequently become friends. That's another story, a peculiar story. But the weird thing was, I thought, why hasn't someone made this a film or a play? Or, you got a cast of 5 characters in one setting, and it all kicks off. And, hell breaks open kind of thing. And I wasn't necessarily thinking of it as a supernatural type story or even horror early on, but then the more I thought about it, it was, if it's the birth of horror, it has to itself be a horror story. And I think that's a lot of the rather snobby critics, film critics, didn't really get, and let's face it, it's all in the title, that it's got to be a horror story because it's about the birth of horror. It's not Merchant Ivory, and I think they were looking for Merchant Ivory because Julian Sands was in it, and the critics prefer that kind of respectful.
The fact that Ken Russell was directing didn't kind of warn them this wasn't going to be a Merchant Ivory.
He'd whacked one of their kind over the head with a rolled up newspaper. Let's face it. So Alexander Walker. So they knew what he thought of them, and so he was persona non grata, as well as enfant terrible and bête noire. He was persona non grata, which is a good triple whammy, isn't
it? It always amuses me that I ended up becoming a film critic for such a long time, because The Devils is one of my favorite movies on the face of the earth.
Too, yeah. I mean, you can imagine what it was like for me. It was a little kind of a double-edged sword when I heard that he was going to direct it. To be honest, I hadn't. The script was at Virgin Films in the early 80s, and they said, "Okay, fine, you've done some rewriting. We'll go and find a director and get back to you." And I think it was a year before they actually rang me, and I still had a job as a copywriter at that point, and I was across the table from my art director, and they said it's Ken Russell, and I finished the phone call and I said to my art director, if you'd written a film, what director would you least want to direct it? And he said Michael Winner. And I said, second choice. He said Ken Russell.
I can understand Michael Winner as the last person you would want to direct. I don't think I wanted Michael to direct Piss into a Bucket, quite frankly. I mean, I think he managed to make a couple of decent films, but I think possibly in the same way that A Monkey with a Typewriter might manage to produce the Sentinel manages to achieve a certain something, despite sort of some fairly obvious lapses of taste. But I did watch the Death Wish 2 and 3 quite recently, and it was, oh my god. For some reason,
I think it was one critic said about Michael Winner, he literally is the only director that on a scene by scene basis does not know where to put the camera.
He directed. I remember that there was a novel back in the 90s. There was a novel. My sister, was very fond of it, called Dirty Weekend by Helen Zahavi, which is almost like a kind of feminist Death Wish. A woman who's finally had enough being horribly treated by arsehole men, and so she basically does several of them in various ways. And Michael Winner directed this piece of feminist rage. And I think this is like getting Leni Riefenstahl to direct Schindler's List. I think Barry Norman said it wouldn't have been so bad if he'd shown any sign of liking women. And not that while I don't exactly sort of setting that much store by Barry Norman's opinion as a critic, then he could have had a point there. I'm tempted to try and see the film just to see how much of a car crash it actually.
It's probably vanished now. I mean, even good films you can't find.
That's
so
true.
I'm sure
This is true.
It's probably
true.
In some vault somewhere in Soho.
But was he? I mean, what was he like to? What was it like to work with him?
Ken,
I mean, not
Ken
when
was. He was perfectly. He was really, really nice, great. And the best thing about him was that he said to them. This was in, I think, probably September of '84, I think. He said, right, let's make it in May. And they said, okay. So none of this farting around for like 6 years of script development. It was like,
yes.
let's do it, because in fairness, he didn't really believe in much rewriting. He did add scenes, but they were more kind of things that he kind of dreamt up while he was filming. He dreamt up the belly dancer, and he dreamt up the. I had the suit of armor approaching the bed, but he imagined the kind of phallic nature of the armor. I actually I did my homework and. She found the actual book that they'd read that night.
Yes.
And actually looked at the stories that they were reading to each other and quoted them and kind of visualized them. But he went a step further. I mean, the funny thing about it in a way is that the way I wrote it originally was there was a kind of prologue and epilogue. It began with Mary Shelley on her deathbed. And she's thinking back to 1816, and then at the very end, it comes back to her on her deathbed, and she's visited by the creature. So they kind of there's a moment of realization between them, and then she dies, and that put the whole film in the context of her misremembering or. Her subjectivity of how she remembered it. But, I think when Ken got hold of it, it wasn't Mary Shelley's imagination he was interested in, but Ken Russell's, So it became, the first thing he did was drop those bits, which is quite funny.
Did you do the novelization?
I did, yeah. I only had
I had the novelization, and I remember those scenes.
Oh right, yeah. Well, I thought the one reason I did it was I thought, well, like for the record, I put those scenes back in, but I only had a month to do it, which but I thought I didn't really want to, having done all that work on it and the research and everything like that, I didn't want to hand it over to someone else to do, to be honest. So I thought, no, I'll do it.
I mean, it's one of the things that's often struck, because I mean, at least with one of the great advantages of writing prose is at least you have a lot more kind of creative control over the vision, over what's put out there. With film, obviously the financial rewards, I understand, can be a lot nicer, and you can reach often a wider audience. But it's got to be this very, very frustrating process a lot of the time, of so many projects that are stillborn or abortive, or end up reaching the screen in a state that's a long way from what you visualized, or in the case of The Guardian, nearly drive you to the point of madness in the process.
Well, most of them are pretty far from what was on the paper, to be honest. But sometimes to the benefit and sometimes not to the benefit. But you know, the awful frustration is you never know on any individual note or correction or alteration to the steering of the ship. You're never quite sure whether you're deluded or they are. You know, sometimes it can be. In retrospect, you think, well, that was a damn good note. That was, you know, I was going in the wrong direction with that, and they were quite right to pull back from it and correct me and say that was rubbish. But equally, you can look back and say, I wish I'd fought that, because it's not a question of fighting. Often it's a question of a kind of war of attrition, and sometimes you've got to choose your battles and that kind of thing. It's and the idea of getting your own way all the time is non-existent, you know. So you have to hope, more than anything, you have to hope that the people you collaborate with get it. That's the dream, really. Not that it's not going to change, but that it's going to change in a beneficial way and kind of improve. And I think if you're with the right group of people, it can be tremendously exciting. I mean, apart from anything, I mean, I've been in love with the screen ever since I saw my first film, I think, really, which was God knows what, probably Gorgo, I think. I don't know if anyone's seen that, but
I've seen that. Saw that when I was about 9 or 10, and saw it again a few years ago, and it's still great fun.
There's another one called City of the Dead, I think.
Yes.
Which was,
Christopher Lee.
That was one of the first ones I saw, and I think I saw Leopard Man as well, or Leopard Men.
Oh, amazing!
Al Luton. I think those are my oldest memories of. But I
love Leopard Man. Leopard Man.
The thing is, however punishing it becomes, the process of doing it, I just get enormously excited at the idea of. I get enormously excited when a film comes up on the cinema screen, or you start a film when you're sitting at home. Yes. And that expectation of images telling a story, and that magical combination of images, narrative, music, acting, production design. It's kind of like a melting pot for all these arts that remarkably, against all the odds, sometimes produces absolutely amazing work when it shouldn't, really, because it's such a shitstorm. And financially crippling most of the time. You wonder how if you're not involved in the film industry, you think, how can so many bad films happen? And as soon as you get involved in it in any degree, you think, how on earth does any good film ever come out?
We talked to a director called Charlie Steeds a little while back, and Charlie Steeds, and he's made a series of films, basically essentially all on micro budgets. He's made, I think, about what was it 17, 18 of them in about since about 20, about sort of the last 8 years or thereabouts. And he would be the first to admit that some of those films don't work very well, but he just loves the process of making them. But I mean, it's just very
much a journeyman. a guy who he's doing it the Ken Russell way. He's doing it let's just put it together and shoot it.
Sheer sort of the wonder often is that if films get made at all, given all the stuff But what I was going to say, because on the collaborative aspect of it, because I mean, one of the things I think of when I think of your work, when I think of Afterlife, the TV series, your TV series, not the shit one with Ricky fucking Gervais. Sorry, I can't believe that got 3 seasons and yours only got 2. That's a major injustice. Where was I? Yes, you've got Leslie Sharp as Alison Mundy in Afterlife. You have Rebecca Hall as Florence Cathcart in The Awakening. And even though this is an adaptation from somebody else's work, you have Anna Maxwell Martin as Merrilee Watkins, and of course they're kind of you're very invested in this idea of bringing these complicated 3-dimensional kind of characters onto the page, but at the same time you've got, I mean, Leslie Sharp is just, I think, one of the outstanding actresses of her generation. I mean, I love Leslie Sharp, bow down and worship Leslie Sharp, but all of them give these extraordinary performances, and so how much was, how much of the characterization came from them, and how much from your script, and how much was the kind of the interplay between the two as a collaborative?
That's interesting. I mean, that was one of the great discoveries of doing a series like Afterlife was they started filming episode 1 when I was still hadn't written the end of the first series. So I knew I wasn't crazy. I knew what was going to happen at the end. But the weird thing was, if you bear with me for a second, we originally had 4 episodes, 4 hours. So the climactic seance of series 1 was episode 4. Okay. And we had a director doing the first 2 episodes, and director doing the second 2 episodes. And then ITV decided, no, it's going to be 6. We're going to give you 2 more episodes. So, okay. So I said, please, can I do the last but one? If you see what I mean. So episode 4 became episode 6 because they were shooting it out of order, that kind of thing. Actually, they didn't shoot it out of order. They just, reshuffled it. So I got the opportunity of a kind of blank slate to do the last but one. And just to give a little example of what was fun about that was, I remember kind of meeting them on the set, and I remember Leslie Sharp saying to me, "Oh, you know what scene I'd really like to do? I'd really like Alison to get really drunk and tell Robert what she thinks of him." That's what she said. So I thought, right, okay, so that's going to be episode 5. So I thought I had a story in mind for it, but I knew it was going to build up to this real shouting match between them, because she said it, and because this is the point I wanted to make, because I'd seen them acting the first couple of episodes, I could kind of see them when I was writing it. And that, I thought, this is why people love writing TV, because they can write for actors they see in their heads, and it happens. It happened really quickly. And I remember the scene. I really loved the scene as they did it, and also the scene didn't change. The weird thing was that I must have caught something about them by then that they felt comfortable with, because it didn't change when they did it, and I was super pleased with that. And I actually thought, no, I could really get into this idea of kind of, writing for the actors that they're cast in the roles, because when you're writing something on spec, you can think of Harrison Ford, or you can think of Clint Eastwood, or whatever, and it could change. I mean, in my case, it changes page by page, because you can never guarantee it's going to be, you never put in the script, Fred looks rather like Harrison Ford. You don't want to play that. You don't want to play that game. But when you actually know who it's going to be, and then what we were also blessed with in that series was we had fantastic guest actors as well, like Adrian Lester and Nikki Amuka Bird and Kenneth Cranham. I mean, and I'm trying to think of his name now. What was his name? The guy that was in Midwinter of the Spirit. What's his name?
Yeah.
David Threlfall, yeah. He was in Afterlife as well. So, you also had, she's going to be in it. Rosemary Leach. Oh, yeah, she's great. She's going to play Robert's mum, And she said, oh, I see I've got Alzheimer's in this. My husband told me that's no great stretch for you, is it?
I've got to say,
she was lovely.
Both my parents are actors, and one of the reasons that I got kind of a bad reputation as a film critic at the paper that I worked at was because I would not give anything less than 1 star out of 5, because I know what it takes to make something. The alchemy and the chemistry that you get out of actors doing a job and doing their job where everybody else is doing their job around them. And, from the person who brings the coffee to the person who's, holding the mic to the person who's putting tape on the floor.
And the funny thing is, I found that also, which has done another kind of a bit of a light bulb moment, is when you go to the set and watch them, they don't seem to be doing anything. They're kind of they're kind of mumbling, shuffling around, doing it. And then they say cut. You think, is that it? Is that it? But when you see it on the screen, of course, it's entirely different.
There are all these kind of long. I mean, from my limited time spent working on film sets when I was at uni, and my brief appearance on Brookside as Santa's Little Helper in a Christmas episode. You get those kind of long periods where absolutely bugger all seems to be happening, at least for the little bit of it there where you are, and then it's all systems go. And so you have this thing where you have to be able to just sit around and pass the time for hours, and then suddenly be up and ready to do it. There's
it's a kind of terminal boredom. It's kind of boredom, and then in instant kind of stress. I'll tell you a funny story though. I was in a cafe, and I'm pointing here because it's in that direction. In Bath, quite close to here, and we were sitting having a cup of coffee, and I looked up at the till. And there's a guy there with a baseball cap on. I thought, he'd actually be quite a good stand-in for Andrew Lincoln. Then I realised it was Andrew Lincoln. And then I remembered he went to school in Bath, and his parents still live here. So I went up and said hello, and I was quite surprised that he instantly recognised me, and we had a good laugh and that kind of thing. And so I said to him, you killed a few zombies since I saw you last. And he said, yeah, just a few. And I said, how are your kids? Because his kids were about 5 or actually, but they're very young actually when he made that. So this is talking about 10 years or more. He said, they're in secondary school now. And I said, what do they think of their dad being a kind of global TV star? He said, they're completely embarrassed by it. He said, they think I'm terrible. He says, I give them advice on acting. This is what I thought was funny. He said, I give them advice. They've got acting kind of classes. And I give my advice on what they're doing. And they say, oh, what do you know, Dad? Our acting teacher says such and such, So he's a kind of loser dad, like all other dads. He doesn't know what he's talking about. I found it so funny.
Oh, my God.
Was the reason he had to leave Afterlife, was that to go and do The Walking Dead, or had you always had a kind of?
No, he was always gonna die in the end.
I love that.
He wasn't always going to die in the end. We wanted to up the ante in series 2. Oh, spoiler, by the way, for anyone that hasn't seen it. But
that's true.
Every 20 years, I think.
It's been out a while.
But maybe someone will watch it again.
I watch it all the time.
We wanted his mortality to be in doubt for series 2, season 2, I should say now. But we had in mind, I say we because, you know, the storylines and everything were very thought out with the production people and the script people. It was very, very tightly knit, brilliant team that I worked with. And we thought, you know what, people can get a diagnosis of cancer and they can go in remission. So we'll have his diagnosis of cancer and he can go in remission at the end of the season. That's, you know, we all know people that's happened to, so that's what we'll do. But as the clock was ticking and we did episode after episode, and he went to his oncologist and he was, you know, writing his list of music for his funeral and all the rest of it, I suddenly had a massive crisis of faith, and I thought, I can't write this episode where he, with one leap, he's free and he goes in remission. Because when you're writing drama, it's not like real life where things like that happen. It's got to be, it's going to feel like a massive cheat to the audience because the whole series is about death. And I had to write an email to the producer, and I said, look, and I didn't do it lightly at all. I said, I don't think I can write that last episode where he goes in remission. I don't think I can do it. And to their credit, they said, we think you're right. And also credit to the producer, Murray Ferguson. He said, this is going to be a difficult phone call for me to tell ITV that we're going to kill off one of the two characters. But I think you're right, and I'm going to do it. A lot of producers wouldn't have said that. A lot of producers would have said, either you do it or we get someone else to write it, or you just got to do it. But he, you know, all credit to him. I was very impressed because he was a producer that supported. I'm not saying he wasn't in any shape or form kind of lightweight. He was quite a tough producer creatively and would question things, and sometimes chuck the whole script out the window to start again. So it wasn't like he was pandering to me in any degree, but he backed me up in that instance, and because they all thought it was the right decision, and he actually bit the bullet and had to deal with it, and
certainly those last two.
In any case, what happened was that we didn't get the ratings in the second series because ITV messed up the schedule and mixed it up with sport every other week, so nobody kind of got the flow of it being on a Saturday night, and ITV decided they didn't want to do drama on Saturday night anymore, so we were stuffed. So it was stuffed anyway, so we may as well have ended it like we did. So if I want to
two episodes of season 2, I mean, I remember it's been a while since I've seen him, but Kate and I we were in pieces with them. I mean, it was just such devastating.
They were so good at the end. They were. Well, the thing was, they did have a genuine affection for each other, and I think actually, it's funny when we told them what we were going to do. It was Leslie that got really upset about it. And Andrew was more like, oh great, I get to do one of those episodes where I'm laced up to a machine and I don't have to do any acting.
It's always hardest on the ones.
And I always thought when they did that final, it's a wrap for Andrew. He's off to the golf course, with his mates, because he loved. He was he did such a tremendous job, but he was also the nicest. Well, he is the nicest bloke you could hope to work with, really, as someone, because you always want in your leads, you want people that are kind of not cheerleaders exactly, but they kind of lead the troops, and create a good atmosphere. And he was definitely that. He was a real a gent, and a good egg. I mean, he was egg, wasn't he? And that's life.
Yes,
this life. Yeah.
I remember that.
Yeah.
I was thinking I was just finishing up uni when that show started. My God, sorry, it just crumbles into dust. I mean, if there had been, because I mean, I understand at one point there was talk of a third. There had been talk of a third season, and I mean, had you any thoughts about where you would, where you'd go with it?
Well, I had lots of. We thought about it that summer. I say we again because I'd always meet with the with the producers thinking about what are we going to do next season if Andrew's not in it, kind of thing. And it was always put to me that we would come up with a character to match with her, probably a male character to match with her. And I could never really, we never, we were cut off in our prime in terms of those discussions, but we never really came up with a character that was, I think, as interesting. I thought, do we pick up on the police character? And I was never keen on a kind of police getting involved in the supernatural story in the world that I'd created anyway. Do we introduce someone from her past or that kind of thing? So anyway, the funny thing was that I don't know if you know, but I did a sequel kind of story in.
Yeah, I was going to ask about that.
In this book. Can you read that back to front?
Yes.
Yes. But there's a story in this called Lost Loved Ones, which I wrote, was it 2 years ago or last year? I can't remember. Which was a sequel to Afterlife. And I realized I could actually go back, and I actually thought, I asked permission from them to give me permission to write about Alison. I thought, you know what? I don't have to have a man. No. I don't have to have another male lead in this, for God's sake. Just have her. What is she doing? And it suddenly became really intriguing to me. What is she doing post-COVID? Because then I had these ideas that she used to be a nurse, and would she have volunteered to work in the NHS through COVID, that kind of thing. And I started to formulate this idea of her dad just dying, and it kind of resurrecting all these feelings about Robert again years later. And she's it's 15, 16 years later. And it just became an intriguing way to have a kind of postscript to the series, really. And kind of enjoyed seeing where she was, because we live quite near Bristol. We often go over there, and often kind of park quite near where they filmed her house. And I often think, oh, I wonder what she's up to. Is she going down the newsagent? Which supermarket does she go to? And that's another thing that was really interesting when they started, by the way. Like I think production designers are very unsung heroes of productions. And the production designer on Afterlife, he did a complete mood board for Alison, not only showing where she lived, but actually where she would go shopping. He'd looked into the entire area of where she lived and said, you'd go shopping here. This is the nearest Tesco's. This is where you catch the bus. And, that was tremendously, you don't realize that these things are done, that they don't directly show on the screen, but they all contribute to the way the story's told, and I think that's tremendous.
Yeah, I mean, because the story Lost Loved Ones, Bafflegab Productions have actually done that as with Leslie
on audio as well. Yeah, that was nice. Yeah, so we managed to. I contacted her and she, because I thought I don't feel good about publishing this unless she gave it the okay, kind of thing. Yeah. So I contacted her through her agent. We weren't in direct contact, and she said she'd love to read it. So she really enjoyed it, and she said, if you ever want to record it, I'll do it. So I thought, I know Simon. Let's get it recorded. Let's get it recorded. So he was Simon at Bafflegab, who does the Uncanny podcast and everything. He was on to do it. So we met up again after all these years going by. So that was great. It was really good fun to meet up again.
Do you think that's all you have to say about Alison Bundy now, or do you think you might return to the character at some point?
I kind of, having done that story, I just think I've set up certain things that could be fun to explore, really. But then equally, I'm equally happy just leaving it open-ended and for people to think, I wonder what she's up to.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean that sense of a life afterwards, I think.
Absolutely, I think that's always good. That's always good with a story, isn't it? To feel that the characters, the story ends, but the characters have a life before and after each story, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yes. As long as it's not with Ricky Gervais, that's important. You do not want. There's the two afterlives you don't want.
Oh yeah.
You don't want, and unless she's going to beat him up, I could see Leslie Sharp beating the daylights out of him. Might just be
I
my
might
wishful
pay for
thinking.
that. I might pay to see that.
Funny those things, like you were saying about Tales from the Crypt, which is that kind of intimidation theme that was in the Peter Cushing episode of Tales from the Crypt. The one thing that I can't, I don't mind any manner of decapitations and God knows what and that kind of thing. I don't like scenes of bullying. If I see a person walking down an alleyway and there's 4 people walking towards them, I really have to leave the room. I have a problem with that. I also have to look away if needles go in the flesh. I don't like that, even though I don't mind Ingrid Pitt being decapitated by that kind of thing.
I'm the same with bullying. I mean, of course, it happened to me a lot at school. Surprise, surprise. But if I see anything like that, it's just I don't want to misuse the word trigger here, but I very quickly go to a place of murderous rage where I don't care if the person doing it is, But
then we're in a difficult position in horror, aren't we? Because we want these things to be aired, don't we? Do you know what I mean? We want the things that we're afraid of to be out there. It's part of why we do it, and the wound is where the light gets in, as they say, and I think there's some. I don't know. I think I probably have no-go areas, but if I think I've got a no-go area, I kind of prod it like a.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
I kind of pick it like a scab. You know what I mean? No, I know I shouldn't, but it's kind of like, if I sense that someone was going to say to me, well, apropos the novel that you've just read, of my unpublished piece that you haven't read, Simon, that was very much that, which has been in my head for about more than 20 years. And it kept coming back to me simply because I thought someone is going to be really pissed off by this, and someone is going to really, really, really not like it. And I thought, I can't just leave it.
Absolutely.
The possibility of someone going to be not deliberately offended, because I think I don't mean it being offensive for the sake of it. What I mean is it's something that will have some impact on people, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, the way that you managed to make a character who should be who you'd think would be such an object of revulsion into someone you actually is actually one of the gentlest and most lovable characters.
Well, that for me was the challenge, and I realized it's preposterous, really, without going into details of what it is, but this was a true crime case from the 19th century that I became fascinated by and researched to the extent that I paid someone to translate the transcript of the legal case, and I wrote to the likes of Colin Wilson and people like that were experts on it. So I did a tremendous amount of research before I even begun to think, what the hell am I going to do with this? And I didn't really want to. I don't know if this makes any sense as a conversation without knowing the subject matter. Yeah. But let's say it's the heartwarming story of sexual perversion and grave robbing. I think that would sum it up. But I didn't know what to do with it, because I knew I didn't want to take a character that had done awful things and make them awful. That to me is no challenge whatsoever. To me, that's like going down the Hannibal Lecter route and just saying this character's a monster, and that's far too straightforward and not very interesting. On the other hand, if I take this character and actually say to myself, you know what, I'm going to go on a journey with this character and actually make you think, or force you, I hope, to have some empathy for this person that's done the most terrible things you can imagine. Then I think there's friction there's a kind of moral frisson going on in the reader's mind, which they have to sort out where they stand on all this. That was my objective anyway, and it's to do with and I thought it was in this age of the subject of transgressiveness. I thought was appropriate for my advancing years to finally get this on paper, and just before I pop my clogs, I'm going to get this. I'm going to give birth to this behemoth.
this awful creature, I acknowledge mine, this thing of darkness.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, and also in a funny kind of way, it kind of made me return to part of the kind of Ken Russell approach of fuck it, I'm going for it. Kind of like, you know what?
Yeah.
It's a scene that nobody's going to tell me not to do this scene. So fuck it.
Now I think about it, if Ken Russell was still around, I could really. I've got to ask, and I again, without revealing anything, there is. I mean, because you've done a lot of research into this, and it's one of those things where it's always fascinating to try and work out where.
I know what you're going to ask. The scene with the horse is made up.
Ah, right.
Okay.
Yeah, I did wonder.
Right.
I mean, it's a wonderful piece of kind of iconoclasm towards somebody who would have just been such a pillar of the establishment. He is literally a horse fucker, One thing I was wondering is, I mean, I remember, I think, first starting to see your short fiction, sort of probably in the late 90s, early noughties. Initially in all venues like All Hallows and then Ash Tree Press, and stories like The Latin Master, which I still remember.
Great. Thank you.
Wonderful feat. And then you kind of were sort of branching out into other forms of horror with the collection of Grey Friar and subsequently PS, and now more recently Tartarus. Because I mean, obviously you'd written prose with the novelization of Gothic, but was there anything that prompted a specific move to
well, I didn't, to be honest, perfectly honest, I didn't know there were any markets for short stories at all until I met Tim Lebbon, I think, and I don't know if you know a guy called Darren Floyd.
Yes, Razorblade.
Razorblade was someone I came across. I think I just saw a copy of the magazine in Cardiff, and he had a gathering of writers, and I met Tim and Ramsey, I think, and Pete Crowther, I think, at this get together, and I realised there were all these small presses, probably in the early part of this century, he says in a Richard Burton voice.
You remember recently at Nervous, the convention they had.
That's right. Yeah, did you go there?
Yes. Well, I think I remember seeing. I don't think I'm not sure if we actually spoke, but I think I saw you.
Well, that would have been my baptism. That convention I think it was at the Students' Union, wasn't it, or somewhere similar in Cardiff, and that's where I found out about these small presses, which I always absorbed the misapprehension that there wasn't anywhere to sell short stories, and I think I started with Ash Tree Press, more or less doing kind of like classic pastiches of the Ghost and Scholars variety kind of thing, really. And I think kind of branched out and found my feet in bit more, found my voice in other stories. I've got no plan, or I don't think I have any particular voice with short stories. I just go with what idea occurs to me, really, and just follow it completely instinctively, But I really enjoy it. You've got complete control over it, and it's as we all know, it's a good crowd of people.
Yeah. And yes, you. I don't think. I think I'd love to see anyone attempting to make a film of the arse liquor. I'm thinking of one of your stories in particular there, which is.
Although you would enjoy Ricky Gervais playing the part.
That might be the only circumstances where I'd be willing to watch Ricky Gervais or something. I mean, this was the other thing about, and of course, another great thing with short fiction is you really can get, you can try pretty much anything there in stuff that you definitely wouldn't, most people wouldn't be able to risk in a film, and probably not, and often not at novel length. You can often.
Well, the other thing, of course, is that there's nothing even approximating any possibility of doing a short, say, supernatural or horror story on TV or film. I mean, some stories are not suited to that kind of length or that kind of telling. So, you know, apart from the very occasional portmanteau film, which you very rarely see these days, you know, a kind of 2-act story or 1-act story is almost impossible to get off the ground, really. So, so it's a futile hope in a sense. And not all ideas need to be 8 hours long or 10 hours long or 5 seasons.
Exactly.
No, I mean, I saw your the Cyclops the other day. The you wrote for
that was a while ago. That was what was it, 5 minutes or an hour? That was kind of the equivalent of a short story in a way. Yeah. That was Shockers. That was Shockers.
Yes. Yeah, I haven't seen the rest of that series. I was trying to sort of get to what you know. I've seen Afterlife, I've seen The Awakening, I've seen Ghostwatch. What haven't I seen of Steve's that, you know, I could sort of.
Did you see Midwinter of the Spirit? Because it's really great.
Oh, yeah, I have seen that as well. And I do remember sort of praising it highly on Facebook, only for somebody to come on and start shouting, "For fuck's sake, it was terrible!" It's like, and I'm so sorry, Steve, because this seems to happen every time.
Every time.
Done. Somebody else from my friends list pops up to tell me how much they didn't like. Just
it's just the way of the world now, isn't it? When I like to, well, I don't like to say what I don't like, because that's my business. But I do like to recommend things that I think some people might enjoy, and it's not to get in a debate over it. I mean, it's not. I've just said I like it. It's, you know, I don't want to write a thesis about it. You're just saying, I rate this for these reasons, but invariably you get someone saying I don't, and suddenly it's a conversation you never wanted to have.
Well, agree to disagree, and bye. That's about it.
And that's before we even get into politics. Yeah.
Oh God, yeah. I still remember talking about Afterlife, and somebody came on and saying, you know, what you really should have done with Rob, and he wrote up kind of a 2,000-word essay, and it was like, oh God, ain't nobody got time for this rubbish.
No.
Mouthed off when ITV commissioned a 6-episode series from you, mate.
Well, the great thing at the moment is, I mean, I always get very kind comments on Ghostwatch, but there's, I would say, probably 1 in 10 is, well, that was a load of rubbish, but, you know, that's fine. To, you know, the way I see it, 30 years later, who gives a fuck, you know? But the funny thing these days, I find quite bemusing in the last week, actually, which is, I'm not going to see that because I know it'll be crap.
Okay.
There's people, a preemptive strike, one would say, of disliking something without having the benefit of any exposure to it whatsoever. You know, you think, what kind of toss?
How do they know? Because it was made in the 90s? Because it was written by a straight cis white male, or, you know?
I used to have students who said that they couldn't watch films from earlier eras because people dressed so weird back then. And they're
black and white.
Well, yeah, no, but we're talking like, I mean, at one point in class, I said, you know, blah, blah, Silence of the Lambs. But of course, you've all seen that. And somebody was like, Miss, I was born in 1990.
Listen here, you little shit.
It's not right. That can't be possible because Charlton Heston in Planet of the Apes only happened last week. In my head.
But then they went on to explain that they couldn't possibly watch it because she had those big, weird shoulder pads in her jacket.
Oh, sorry.
And that's strange.
An ex of mine who just wouldn't watch black and white films, just because they weren't too. If they were interesting, they'd be in colour. So I think I hated subtitled films as well. And I do remember, not long before we broke up, I had made a promise that she would at least give it a chance and watch Seven Samurai. And I do wonder sometimes if the final straw in our relationship was the fact that she realised she had basically pledged to watch 3¼ hours of black and white subtitled Japanese cinema. That was like, okay, I've had enough. I've had enough of this relationship. That's the final straw. Bye. Here's your engagement.
We were in Venice a couple of weeks ago, and we saw a film. Admittedly, it was a gallery film, so it was kind of video art. and it consisted of a sheep wandering around a church. Okay,
Okay.
and it wasn't. Listen, it wasn't the worst film we saw. But I saw the sheep arriving top left, and I said to Pat, "This shot is not going to end until that sheep leaves the shot." And I was right. And then it cut to another shot, and the sheep came in through the bottom right. And I said, "You know what? This shot is not going to cut until the sheep leaves the room." And I was right again.
Oh my
I was
God.
right every single shot.
Oh my Lord.
There's a certain sort of film
Yep,
that will not cut until the person leaves the shot.
that is true.
And yet they would never acknowledge that that's a cliche, but it is.
I do sort of rather. There's I don't know if you remember. There's a film came out a couple of years ago called Sisu. It's a Finnish movie.
I know the title. Yeah, I haven't seen it now.
I mean, it's tremendously entertaining in a sort of over the top, ludicrous way. Although the exploits of the main character are partly inspired by a real life Finnish sniper called Simo Heiha, who basically took out something like 500 Russian soldiers single-handed with his rifle, and another 200, I think, at close range. He was a pretty fearsome. He was this quite small and assuming guy who, when the Russians invaded, was suddenly became this fairly ferocious individual. Anyway, it's great fun. There's a certain catharsis, there's a certain enjoyment in seeing like Nazis splattered bloodily in all directions. But he's like, at the beginning, this guy's basically prospecting for gold in the middle of nowhere, and he has a little dog. It's a Bedlington Terrier. And the reviewer from The Spectator had apparently gone in thinking because it was a Finnish film, it was going to be this, sort of long, quiet movie with basically people talking to each other in kitchens about existentialism or something. And of course, instead, but I mean, of course, we could speculate as to why, as journalists from The Spectator, would not enjoy the spectacle of large numbers of Nazis being dispatched horribly. What a mystery. But also, she sort of said, and he's got a Bedlington Terrier, which is the campus least macho dog imaginable, except a poodle. And I'm like, I'm sorry, have you ever seen a Bedlington? Have you ever met a Bedlington Terrier? They are lovely, affectionate little dogs. My brother-in-law has one, and we adore him. But they're also ratting dogs. They were bred to hunt rats. And if you've ever seen a Bedlington go after rats, it makes what the guy in Sisu does to the Nazis look positively tame. just a small hobby horse of mine there. But yeah, this the idea of this, I'm thinking, oh, this is going to be a a sort of a quiet sort of existential discussion of serious themes, and just like, holy shit. I
have to wonder how many Finnish films she's seen, because all the ones I've seen have been superlatively odd. And I don't say that as a, as a drawback.
Thinking, vaguely Scandinavian, Nordic kind of thing. Oh, they're all liking Mar Bergman or whatever.
The Finns are weird. They're very, very weird.
Well, I mean, I always love. I mean, that actual word "sisu" is basically this idea of total of stubbornness taken to and refusal
to a ridiculous degree.
Yes. I once knew a woman who used to work in Finland, and she translated it as the idea that if a Finn encountered a door that only opened inwards, he or she could make it open outwards by sheer force of will. And I kind of admire that attitude. I think most writers need a little bit of that just to get through.
I wish.
So before we wrap this up, I suppose the big question still to ask is, what next? What are you working on now?
I'm doing a couple of short stories and about to embark on a screenplay with a director that's very interesting. But I can't really mention what that is because it's not really underway. But I'm looking forward to doing it. And then what's after that, I don't really know. It's an open door, or rather it's a closed door, which I will keep pushing at as you came with that tremendously useful metaphor.
And obviously really hoping that novel, which we cannot discuss the subject of right now, will see print in the near future. I mean, having, as I said, having been fortunate enough to read it, I was tremendously blown away by what you've done with it, and
Thank you. That really was helpful. Thank you.
You're more than welcome. And yeah, I would love to see it filmed as well, especially the scene in the graveyard with the.
Yeah,
you can be technical advisor, but not to the horse scene.
Not oh boy, no. There were some bits which is like, okay, how I'm not quite sure how you're going to film that one, Ken.
Judicious use of framing, little bit of scrim, a lot of shadow.
I call it cowardly.
Loud distress neighing.
I was going to say Vaseline on the lens, but I think all the Vaseline will be used elsewhere.
Oh, that scraping noise you can hear is the tone of the conversation happening along the floor, which is exactly where it's supposed to be on this show. Okay, so
it's a good point to end it, I think.
Yes.
Okay, so
this has been absolutely wonderful, and I'm so glad that I got a chance to talk to you.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much.
Yes, so you can find links to Steve's website and information about his current projects and what he's got going on down below. I think your latest book at the moment is The Good Unknown, the story collection from Tartarus Press, which is really good, and that includes the story Lost Loved Ones, which brings us up to date with Alison Mundy from Afterlife, and the good one, the Stephen Volk one, not the Ricky Gervais one. And you will find a link to that collection also in the comments below. So we will be back in the near future to lower the tone of the conversation, as you have come to expect once again. If you'd like to support No Darkness But Ours, you'll find links to our Patreon and our Ko-Fi pages below. If you've enjoyed this episode, please hit the like button, please share, and please consider subscribing to the channel. And until the next time, I have been Simon Bestwood.
I remain Gemma Files, and this, of course, is still No Darkness But Ours.
But ours.